Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you're watching from, I hope you're having an awesome day. Today we're dialing the clock back, way back to the golden age of late-night television, when staying up past midnight actually felt dangerous. If you were anywhere near the New York City airwaves from the 60s through the early 80s, glued to WPIX-TV Channel 11, then you already know the show I'm talking about. That eerie intro, the one that made you question your life choices for staying up alone in the dark? Welcome to Chiller Theater. Using basic materials, a little sculpting magic, and because I like to go the extra mile, a motion-activated sensor that triggers the original audio from the show, I have recreated a snapshot of that iconic prop. So yes, this thing doesn't just look creepy. It knows when you're there. So go ahead, grab your popcorn, maybe turn on a light or two, sit back, and let's get into it. Well, like every build I do, I always start out with a quick thumbnail sketch of the overall design. Once that's penciled in, I move on to a color illustration of the main components. It helps me see the full picture and make sure everything lines up proportionally before I dive in head first. Most of the materials were already sitting in my shop. So from here, putting together this classic prop and wiring an emotion-activated sound should be a piece of cake, I hope. Okay. Here are the materials I will be using for today's build. A hexagonal plastic stepping stone. A 1 by 3 by 6 foot piece of pine, too long to fit on camera. Das air hardening clay. 1 8 gigabyte SD card. A PIR motion sensor activated audio player with speaker. A 9-volt battery housing. An on-off rocker switch, a 9-volt to 5-volt buck converter, and finally, the star of the show, one mannequin's right hand. I start by marking 6 pieces of 1 by 3 lumber, each measuring 7 3/16 of an inch long. Then I scribe a mark with my machinist square to make sure it is perfectly aligned. Off camera, I trimmed one end of the pine board to a 30-degree angle. Now I'll flip it around, set it against a jig at the end of the saw, double-check the alignment, and make the second miter cut. Precision is key for a proper fit. With all 6 sidewalls cut, it's time for a classic carpenter's trick, taping the edges together to form a perfect hexagon. I start by carefully aligning 2 pieces, making sure the edges meet perfectly without any gaps. Once they're flush, I lay 2 strips of tape across the joint to hold them in place. Then I move on to the next scene, repeating the process until all 6 sides are snug as a bug in a rug. This method might seem simple, but it's a real time saver. It keeps everything aligned while giving me a chance to make small adjustments before committing to glue everything together. By the time the last seam is taped, the hexagon holds its shape almost magically, ready for the next stage of the build. Next, I'll lock the hexagon base together using CA adhesive. I start by applying a thin bead of glue along each of the angled cuts, just enough to coat the surface without making a mess. I do this on both sides of the joint, then carefully lift and press the pieces together, making sure everything stays perfectly aligned. Once the joint is snug, I spray a quick hit of accelerator, and just like that, the glue cures almost instantly. This method not only creates a strong, durable bond, but it also helps the wood base hold its precise hexagonal shape while I move on to the next steps. It's a fast, efficient way to turn a pile of individual boards into a solid, stable surface, ready for detailing. Now it's time to do a dry fit. Perfect. Fits like a glove. To finish off the base, I'm adding nail glides. These little helpers do double duty. They lift the prop slightly off the surface, giving it a bit of presence, and they also create space for the speaker underneath. That way, when the motion-activated sound kicks in, it comes through loud and clear without getting muffled by the tabletop. All I need to do is take a nail glide and position it over the center of a wall, making sure it's perfectly centered. Then I push it back just ever so slightly, so the head of the nail glide stays hidden. This keeps everything looking clean and professional, without any hardware sticking out where it shouldn't. Once it's in position, I gently hammer it home, making sure it sits flush and secure. When all 6 are in place, the base is not only stable and lifted just enough for the sound to carry, but it also looks polished and intentional. To create an access point for the motion-activated PIR module, I need to drill a hole from the inside of the base that's just big enough to fit the 1/2-inch diameter sensor. This part requires extra care. I can't go too deep, or I risk punching through the base and ruining all the work I've done so far. One wrong move here, and I'd be staring at starting over from scratch. So slow and steady wins the race. I take my time making sure the hole is perfectly placed and just the right depth for the module to sit snugly inside. Oh no! Son of a... Good news and bad news. The bad news is what you're looking at. The good news, I found an old 35mm film canister that might just do the job. Moment of truth. Let's see if it works. Awesome! See, I meant to do that. Okay, all that's left to do now is to carefully cut off the back of the plastic film canister using my retractable knife. If I can do that without an unscheduled emergency room visit, we'll be back in the saddle in no time. Now, let's see if we don't hit any more hiccups. Though knowing builds like this, there's always a chance for a little chaos along the way. Now, let's do some sculpting. I'll be using Das Air Dry Sculpting clay, which is perfect for projects like this. I start with a generous chunk and begin shaping each letter by hand, molding and smoothing it until it starts to take the form I'm looking for. This clay is great because it doesn't require baking, so I can focus on getting each letter just right without worrying about extra steps. With my trusty sculpting tools in one hand and a handful of machine screws in the other, I start with the letter C. Here's my plan of attack. First, I carefully shape the letter from the clay, paying attention to curves, edges, and overall proportions so it matches the look I'm going for. Rather than relying solely on glue, I embed a machine screw directly into the base of each letter. This gives me a solid, mechanical fastening, ensuring each letter is firmly anchored and won't shift over time. I repeat this process for each subsequent letter, sculpting, checking, and securing them one by one. It takes a little patience, but the result is a series of letters that are both visually clean and rock-solid stable, ready to become the centerpiece of the prop.
Many unbearable hours later.
After sculpting all the letters and embedding the screws, here's how they look like. I'll let them air dry overnight before painting and weathering them to match the original. For the dead tree in the background, I'm using a wire armature I made off camera from a coat hanger. To keep it steady, I'll embed a machine screw into the base, making sure it's firmly anchored before moving on to shaping the branches. To hold the wires in place, I'll use 22-gauge jewelry wire. This keeps the limbs stable while I prepare the hot melt glue to lock everything securely together. Next is to attach the screw, and with a little movie magic. The tree armature is complete, and now it's time to sculpt the clay bark. Using my hot melt glue gun, I apply a generous layer of glue over the entire armature. This not only holds all the wires and joints firmly in place, but also creates a stable foundation for the clay, making it much easier to attach and shape the tree branches without anything shifting or wobbling. This 2-inch thick foam piece will act as a temporary base, giving me a stable surface to sculpt the tree before it's permanently mounted. Now I'll cut off another chunk of clay and start kneading it, carefully shaping it into the trunk of the tree. I take my time working the clay evenly to build up both thickness and texture, making sure it looks natural and sturdy. As I shape it, I keep the proportions in mind so the trunk will support the branches and give the whole tree a balanced, realistic appearance once it's finished. Now comes the fun part, wrapping the wire armature with clay. I take a slab of clay and press it around the trunk, carefully squeezing and molding it to follow the shape of the wire beneath. This is where the tree really starts to take form, as the clay begins to mimic the natural twists and curves of branches. I work slowly, blending the clay at each joint so the transition from trunk to branches looks seamless, giving the tree a sturdy yet organic appearance. By the time I'm done, the bare wire will be completely hidden out of sight, and it starts to feel like a gnarled tree ready for the next layer of texture. Finally, I take my sculpting tool and go over the entire tree, carefully blending all the seams and joints so nothing looks patchy. This step makes the trunk and branches flow together naturally, giving the tree a cohesive, organic look.
The next morning.
After curing overnight, here's what it looks like, fully hardened and ready for the next steps of painting and dry brushing. And here are the letters. Off camera, I took a piece of foam core and used the nut and bolt fasteners embedded in each one to secure them in place. This gives me a stable setup so I can paint them cleanly without having to handle them directly. Now I'll start applying spray paint. First, I'll use gloss black spray paint and primer by Rust-Oleum. Before I begin, I make sure to wear a respirator and work in a well-ventilated area to keep things safe. When spraying, I hold the can about 6 to 12 inches away from the piece and use smooth, even passes, gradually building up the coverage instead of trying to hit it all at once. I keep the can moving to avoid drips or heavy spots, letting each light coat do its job for a clean, professional finish.
One day later.
Now that everything is nice and dry, I'll begin weathering the letters using Vallejo olive green and deep green. With a dry brush and very little paint, I lightly hit the raised areas to bring out texture and create a worn, aged look, just like on the real prop. After weathering all the letters in the 2 shades of green, off camera I applied a flat, clear coat over them. This not only seals and protects the paint, but also reduces any unwanted shine. The matte finish gives the letters a more natural, worn appearance, making them look convincingly aged and much eerier, just like the originals from the show. While waiting for the green letters to dry, I also, behind the scenes, lightly dry brushed the high spots on the tree. This helps bring out the details and adds more visual interest to the bark and branches. I'll set both the tree and letters aside to cure overnight, and once they're fully set, I can start shaping the hand.
The following day,
To add the sixth finger, I used CA glue to attach a leftover piece of coat hanger wire. This gives the clay something to grip onto and helps hold the shape securely in place. Hi there, remember me? Check it out, I can count to 6 on one hand now. Pretty impressive, right? I mean, who needs 2 hands when you've got a built-in upgrade like this? Math just got a whole lot easier, but a little more disturbing. Later. To attach the hand to the center of the base, I'll use my rotary tool to carefully carve out a recessed section. I take my time here, removing material little by little to make sure the cavity is just deep and wide enough for the screw to sit comfortably without compromising the structure of the hand. I'll keep test fitting as I go, checking that everything lines up properly and sits flush. Once I'm satisfied with the fit, this will allow me to securely fasten the hand to the base later on, keeping it solid and perfectly positioned as the centerpiece of the prop. Behind the scenes, I marked out all the hole locations on the base for the hand, tree, and letters. I took my time measuring and spacing everything out, checking alignment and proportions so the overall layout feels balanced and true to the original design. I also double-checked each mark before committing, making sure nothing feels crowded or out of place. This step really helps eliminate guesswork later on, so when it comes time for final assembly, everything lines up cleanly and falls right into position. Next, I use a 5/16 of an inch drill bit to carefully open all the through holes for the hand, tree, and letters. Once every hole is drilled and checked for fit, I'll be ready to move on to applying the final coat and finishing touches. And here are all the holes drilled out. You'll also notice I carved out an opening behind the tree for the on-off switch, keeping it accessible but nicely hidden from view. And the last opening is for the motion sensor at the front, positioned to easily pick up movement as someone approaches. All that's left now is to spray paint the hand and base in the same color. For this, I'll be using Satin Brick Spray Paint and Primer by Krylon. This red brick tone gives the look of old, dried-out, cracked clay, barren soil, which is exactly the effect I'm going for. It helps tie everything together visually, so it feels like one cohesive piece.
many hours later,
To really bring the hand to life, I'll start with Matte Vintage Rose by Krylon. Then I'll move on to Tamiya's Flat Flesh Spray Paint. I'll apply an even coat of the rose color all over as my base layer. Then I will lightly mist the upper front portion of the hand, creating subtle highlights where light would naturally hit the surface. This gives the impression of depth and form. Once the highlights are in place, I step back and gently mist the rest of the hand from a farther distance. This softer pass ensures the shading remains subtle and natural, blending smoothly with the highlights and the base color. By layering the spray this way, I can emphasize the contours of the fingers, knuckles, and wrist, giving the hand a realistic, tactile appearance that draws the viewer's eye and adds more character to the overall piece. As an added effect, to make the piece stand out even more, I'll water down the apple red paint and use my small spray bottle to create streaks and drips across the base and hand. By controlling the flow and direction of the spray, I can mimic the natural way liquids run and pool, adding a sense of depth and realism. These subtle drips catch the eye and give the scene a dynamic, slightly unsettling effect, making the prop feel alive and much more visually striking. Once the base is completely dry, I use Folk Art Apple Red acrylic paint to finish the ground. This creates the look of a river of blood as seen in the original intro, adding a dramatic and eerie touch to the piece, which really brings the prop to life. Later, I will also add the apple red paint to the bottom portion of the hand for continuity. This final touch blends the hand seamlessly with the base, giving it that eerie, unforgettable Chiller Theater vibe. While these two pieces dry, it's time for my second favorite part of any build. Can you guess what it is? You guessed it, wiring everything together. Here are the electrical components I'll be using to bring this build to life. To power everything, I'll use a 9-volt battery with a waterproof housing. an on-off rocker switch, which will be placed discreetly behind the tree, 3 heat-shrink butt connectors to secure and insulate the wiring, a 9-volt DC to 5-volt DC buck converter to step down the voltage for the components, an 8 GB SD card to store and play the motion-activated audio, the audio player module, which will trigger the sound when motion is detected, the PIR motion sensor, which will detect movement and activate the sound module, and a 2-inch speaker to project the audio clearly from the prop. And with that said, here are all the electronics installed neatly under the base, completely hidden from view. After everything has been fastened to the underside of the base, all that's left now is to power it on. Now with a wave of my hand. Cool. It looks and sounds awesome. And there you have it, my friends. A snapshot of the opening scene to Chiller Theater. This would look amazing as part of your Halloween decor, on a mantle, worked into a themed shelf, or even as a spooky centerpiece in a haunted escape room setup. It's the kind of piece that quietly draws attention. Something guests will notice, lean in toward, and take a second look at. Looking at it now, it still gives the 8-year-old in me goosebumps. Especially when the audio kicks in. It's a great prop to give someone a good scare. Maybe not a full-on heart attack, but definitely enough to make them jump 10 feet in the air. Alrighty then, moving on. To help support the channel, please check out my Etsy store at toyandpropmasters.etsy.com, where you'll find something for everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next build.